Welcome back, everyone. This is part 4 of the explanation of the chapter A Matter of Time, which is written by Victor Canning. So, in the earlier parts, we have read about the character Chris Selby, how he was involved into smuggling of watches. He used to make trips to Paris, and out of those 5 or 6 trips, 2 were for the smuggling of watches. He used to take his car over to Dover and back to Calais, and this is how he used to bring back 5,000 watches packed up into his car. Now, the last part that we read was that in November, when he went to Paris, he was really angry. He was agitated. He was furious. Why? Because his profits were reduced. As the watches that he had received were not up to the specifications, were not according to the details which he had received about the watches, some of them had been broken. So that is why he was very angry, and he shouts and attacks on Odiat, who was the person who had got them packed last time when he had visited in July. Okay, so then Odiat promises that next assignment which is going to come, the next consignment which is going to come the next day, the following day, will not be having any kind of trouble. Alright, so let's continue reading on page number 88. But the next day, the watches hadn't arrived. But the next day, Selby was waiting, but the watches did not arrive. Nor the morning or the day after that when Selby drove around the shop. So even Selby even went around the shop to check if the watches had come, but in the morning or the day after, it was 2 days and the watches had not come. Selby had hoped the watches would arrive that morning, so they would be packed in time for him to make Calais for the last ferry. He was really hoping that the watches arrive that morning so that they are packed up on time so that he can make his last trip for Calais. And he wanted to be in London the following day, that means the next day, for the new show which he had an interest. That means he will be getting that 15% from that show. So he wanted to be in London. He swore that if watches did not come in time, he would take his business elsewhere. So he calls up Odiat and he says that if by today I don't receive my watches, then I will take this consignment to somebody else. In the afternoon, he telephoned and learned that the watches had just arrived. So he calls up Odiat and he tells him that the watches had arrived. He whipped around to Odiat and told him exactly how he wanted the watches packed. So that means he quickly hurried up to his shop, to his garage, and he told him how he wants those watches to be packed so that they are not damaged this time. Odiat promised that his brothers would ensure that there were no duds, and he promises that his brothers are there to look after all the packaging thing. The car would be picked up at 4 in the morning, which would give Selby time to drive to Calais and make the early morning ferry. And then he says that your car will be picked up at 4 in the morning, and then it would be parked up in my garage, and then it would give Selby time to drive to Calais because then he has to reach London as well. And then he would make the early morning ferry. That means in the morning, because it would take just 3 to 4 hours for them to pack everything in the car. So in that same morning, he would leave for the last trip of the year. It meant he wouldn't get much sleep that evening, but he was used to that. Since he was working in this theater agency, so there are shows which end up throughout the night, which the rehearsals are there. So he had a habit of sleeping late, of not getting enough sleep. Just after 4 in the morning, he was driving fast and singing to himself. So as promised by Odiat, his packaging was done and he leaves. At Calais, he had no trouble with the douane. That means, what is douane? The custom house in French. So at Calais, he had no trouble there because people trusted him. He saw his car aboard and went down for a cup of coffee. So he could see that his car has been passed, and then he goes down for a coffee. Then he dozed for an hour. That means he sleeps for an hour. At Dover, he went ashore and saw his cases through. So at Dover, when his car stopped, he went ashore and saw his cases through. Then he went to clear his car. So from Dover to Calais, the car is brought in a ship. So he saw that his car has been brought ashore. That means it has been brought back to the land from the ship, and then he watched his cases through. That means he noticed whether he tried to observe whether the watches are fine or not. Then he went over to clear his car, and then he went over to the customs department to get his car cleared. The customs officer was one he knew well, a man of about his own age, and the customs officer who was standing there for the checking purpose, Selby very well knew him, and Selby and that custom officer were of the same age. Everything went well. The smile, the easy manner, and the promise of a free seat at his new show if the officer liked to write and remind him sometime. And then that whole procedure again, how he used to put up a great show, that smile, that charming smile, and the easy manner, not getting nervous, putting up a great show of being very confident, and then giving those free complimentary tickets of the show if the officer liked to write and remind him sometime. Means write a letter to him and remind him that he wants to get those free tickets. He had got all the clear signal and was about to get into the car when there was a mad wail of sirens. That means there was a loud continuous sound of sirens. It went on for a few seconds and then everything stopped. Selby did not have to be told what it was. Now he already knew what it meant. If there are sirens wailing with a loud noise, Selby knew what it meant. In those days, the First World War wasn't too long ago. That means it was not much time that the World War had got over, and when the sirens went off, everybody stopped and there was a complete silence for 2 minutes. So it was the protocol that was followed, that if there are sirens playing, after that everybody had to maintain a 2-minute silence for all those people who must have died in First World War. Even the seagulls stopped bawling their heads off, and even the seagulls stopped making any kind of sound. Chris Selby and the officer stood like a couple of wax figures. So they were standing like a statue, and you could have heard a pin drop. There was silence. There was no sound at all. No one did drop a pin. So here the old man says no one did drop a pin. There was no pin dropped on the floor, but Chris and the officer heard something else. Can you guess what was that? Great. From the car, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but loud enough to do the damage, came the gentle sound of 5,000 watches ticking, all carefully wound by the half-witted Audiard brothers, who wanted to please the Anglais by making sure that he had watches that worked as well as looked good. Now, since there was a pin drop silence, and Audiard brothers had packed those 5,000 watches in such a good way that they not only worked good, but they looked good as well. So when there was pin drop silence from the car, there was a sound of 5,000 watches ticking together. What must have happened now? Customs officer must have come to know about it. Yes? It was here that my friend stopped his story to finish his sandwich. Here we come to the present, the coffee table. So the narrator says that it was here this old man stopped and he started finishing up his sandwich. I had had my 10 bobs worth all right. And the narrator says that well-suited man says that it was worth giving that 10 bob notes to this man, but there's always something that drives a man on to get a little more for his money. And I said, but since I'm a man and I always want something more for what I have paid, so I said, and he says something. What is it? We'll come to know